morning, good vach, shavua tov. Good to be learning with you on a Saturday night. Let's light up the darkness. And it's already Sunday morning on the East Coast. As always, I'm in awe of everyone who's tuning in at such a crazy late hour. Your dedication is beautiful, and it's going to stand you in tremendous good stead, an amazing merit to you in your journey through this world. Who's in the house? I'm going to keep it efficient because it's so late. Karen in Northern California, Lorraine in Texas, Joe in the Inland Empire, Sharon in New Jersey, Melissa in Great Neck, New York, Bill in mid-Missouri, and Ella in Southern California, and Aoife in Florida. Welcome, everybody. Our daf tonight is page 6 here in Tractate Avoda, Zara, the 27th volume of the Talmud. Continuing our journey through Mishna number 1 here in chapter 1 of Avoda Zara, Daf Vav, page 6, right near the top. A dilemma was raised before the sages when the Mishnah taught that it is prohibited to conduct business with idolaters on the 3 days before their festival. Like the overall concept here that we've been exploring is idolatry is prohibited, not just for the Jews, but for all people, to worship gods made of false gods made of metal and stone and wood. This is an affront to the Creator, the Holy One, who created all of us and the universe. And since so many people are misguided in this way, especially in the ancient world, we don't want to in any way contribute to their idolatry. So if we were to give them something to celebrate in the days immediately before their idolatrous festival arrives, they might, sacrifice extra animals, have extra rejoicing, pour extra libations to their idols, and then we would have been contributing to their idolatry. It's also placing a stumbling block before the blind, since they apparently don't realize that they should not be doing this. So a dilemma was raised before the sages when the Mishnah teaches that it is prohibited to conduct business with idolaters on the 3 days before their festival. Do the 3 days include them, i.e. the days preceding the festival and their festival itself, in which case the prohibition applies only to the festival and the 2 preceding days, or perhaps it is referring to them without their festivals. In other words, when we say 3 days preceding the festival, do we mean we don't do business with them for the 3 days right before their festival begins on the 4th day? Or are we saying we don't do business with them for the 2 days before their festival begins on the 3rd day of this little period? So the Gemara suggests a proof from the Mishnah, our next Mishnah in the chapter, which comes on page 7b. Come in here, as Rabbi Yishmael says, on the 3 days before the festivals of the idolaters and the 3 days after them, these actions are prohibited. And the Gemara analyzes this statement. If it enters your mind that the 3 days include them and their festival, well, this would mean that Rabbi Yishmael counts the day of their festival twice, as he counts it initially as part of the first set of 3 days, and then he would also be counting it at the end along with the second set of 3 days. Clearly, therefore, the 3 days do not include the day of the festival itself. So if the idolaters have a festival, let's say on a Wednesday, right? So then you can't do business with them on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. That's the 3 days before. And then you can't do business with them on the Thursday, Friday. And of course, we wouldn't do business with them on Shabbos anyway. But it's that same idea, the 3 days after, but not including the festival itself. The Gemara rejects this proof. It is possible that the festival is counted as one of the initial 3 days, i.e. the 3 days include them and their festival, but is not counted as part of the 3 days following the festival. But since Rabbi Yishmael taught that these actions are prohibited during the 3 days before them, he also used the same expression and taught that these actions are prohibited during the 3 days after them, although what he's actually teaching is that these actions are prohibited only during the 2 days after it. In other words, we're looking at the language itself. When we say the 3 days before the festival, does that include the festival itself or not? Since we also say in a Baraisa that we don't do business with them for 3 days after the festival for the same reason, Is the grammar so clear that we can therefore prove this is only talking about the 3 days preceding the festival, which comes on the fourth day? The grammar is not clear enough to be a proof. Obviously, if we had the possibility, of questioning the rabbi who formulated the Baraisa and asking, what did you mean? We would have the answer. But we're trying to derive what he meant from just the language that is available. So the Gemara suggests, come and hear a proof from that which Rabbi Tachlifa bar Avdimi says that Shmuel says, right? Trying to understand the prohibition in our Mishnah. Does it mean the 3 days, the complete 3 days before the festival starts on the fourth day, or just 2 days and then the festival starts on the third day and all 3 days are included in the prohibition? Is it a 3-day prohibition or a 4-day prohibition that is being referred to in our Mishnah? And we're looking at other Mishnayos and Baraisas to form a proof of what it means. Right, so come in here a proof from that which Rav Tachlifa bar Avdimi says that Shmuel says. According to the statement of Rabbi Yishmael, it is always prohibited to engage in business with Notzrim. So Notzrim, this is a controversial word. It's really referring to the early Christians who were considered idolaters, right? Idolaters. That they were, inventing or extending, or, it was a religion of idolatry. This is not the way we consider Christians today. Christianity is definitely not Judaism. Jews are not permitted to practice any religion that is not Judaism. But this particular, let me just read the note here, where it says, according to Rav Steinsaltz, okay, so the Rambam, Maimonides, when commenting on this matter, had comments censored from most editions, right? Because there was really, whenever Jews say anything that might be attributed to a prohibition on the practices of Christians or dealing with Christians, it's, obviously problematic. And Jews and the Talmud and, our teachings have been suppressed and persecuted by various Christian sects in history over the last, 1,000 to 2,000 years. So in the early, but this, right, what we're talking about here is the early Christians who were often Jews breaking away from Judaism. That's why the sages had a big problem with it. Since Christians were considered idol worshippers and Sunday is their festival, it is prohibited to buy items from them or sell items to them in the land of Israel on Thursday and Friday of every week. With regard to Sunday itself, right, which is the Christian Sabbath, the prohibition applies even outside of the land of Israel. Now here's the note from Rav Steinsaltz. The accepted practice nowadays is to permit such practices since they do not really engage, the word is really, since they do not really engage in idol worship, as well as for other reasons, right? So like the relationship between Jews and Christians theologically has evolved over time. Like we don't practice Christianity and we're not permitted to practice Christianity. There's obviously a lot that ties together Jews and Christians, Judeo-Christian ethics. Christians are very interested in Jewish teaching because 3/4 of the Christian Bible is Tanakh, is the Hebrew Bible. So of course there's a warm and close and interesting back and forth and relationship. And we're so honored. In fact, so many Christians are learning with us. But we have to understand that there are boundaries, right? There are boundaries. And a Jew is obligated to keep the Sabbath, on Shabbos, on Saturday. And we're obligated in 606 commandments that non-Jews are not obligated in. But Christians, along with all other humans, are obligated in the 7 Noahide commandments. And obviously there's a lot of attention paid to many teachings in the Torah and throughout the Hebrew Bible that apply to our cousins, as it were. Okay, let's keep learning here. The point is, what we're learning about is the simple question in terms of idolaters, right? People who in their worship are going to commit idolatry. And they're having a festival, and really what we're talking about here is Rome, right? Rome, non-Christian Rome, pre-Christian Rome. We're talking about Rome that was worshiping a pantheon of gods, and as we'll even talk about today, their festivals like Saturnalia and Calenda, where for sure they're worshiping gods of wood and stone and metal. That's what we're really talking about here. And we're just learning out a principle from this other teaching where the question is, do the days preceding the festival include the festival itself, this non-Jewish festival? Okay, where am I? And if it enters your mind that the 3 days of the Mishnah include those days and the festival, i.e. that only 2 days preceding and the following and following the festival are included in the prohibition, then according to Rabbi Yishmael, there are still Wednesday and Thursday on which it is permitted to engage in business with the Notzrim. So the Gemara clarifies, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, I have no dilemma, as it is clear that the 3 days mentioned in the Mishnah are them without their festival. When I raise the dilemma, it is according to the opinion of the rabbis. What days are included in the prohibition according to their opinion? And Ravina says, come in here, a proof from the continuation of the Mishnah. And these are the festivals of the idolaters: Calenda, Saturnalia, and Cratesis. I don't know how to pronounce that. Cratesis. And Rav Chanin bar Rava says in explanation of that Mishnah, when do these festivals occur? So Calenda is held during the 8 days after the winter solstice, right? So the winter solstice, December 21st, generally speaking. And for the following 8 days after that, in Rome, they had this holiday called Calenda. And Saturnalia, which is held during the 8 days before the winter solstice. So good to be a Roman in terms of having a festival. They had a 16-day festival, or maybe 17 days if you include the winter solstice, but I think it's 16 days. And your mnemonic to remember which festival is which is that the festival that occurs after the solstice is mentioned first, and the festival that takes place after it is mentioned later, right? So in order, in the chronological order, it goes Saturnalia followed by Calenda, with the midpoint being the winter solstice. As in the verse, you have hemmed me in behind and before from Psalm 139. It's just helping, Jews who study Talmud keep track of these idolatrous holidays of Saturnalia and Calenda. Now, why are we talking about that here? Ravina explains the proof. And if it enters your mind that the Tana of the Mishnah counts them and their festival, in this case, there are 10 days that are included in the prohibition, the 8 days of their festival, and the 2 days beforehand. Why then would the Mishnah say that the prohibition applies for only 3 days? If the 3 days do not include the festivals themselves, then this difficulty does not apply. So we can't sell, right, an animal that might be used as a sacrifice in their idolatrous practices for the 3 days preceding Saturnalia. Then it makes sense. But if you're saying it's 2 days plus the festival itself, well then when you have an 8-day festival, it should be a 10-day prohibition, not a 3-day prohibition. So the Gemara responds, that proof is inconclusive, as perhaps the Tana of our Mishnah counts all of the festival of Calenda as 1 day. Rav Ashi says, come in here, a proof from the Mishnah, which specifies that the time that the actions are prohibited is on the 3 days before the festivals of the idolaters. And if it enters your mind that the Mishnah is referring to them and their festival, let it teach at the time of the festivals of the idolaters, it is prohibited to engage in business with them for 3 days. The wording of the Mishnah indicates that all 3 of the days come before their festival begins. And if you would say that which is taught in the Mishnah before the festivals of the idolaters serves to exclude the days following their festivals, i.e. the Tana is clearly indicating that the prohibition applies before rather than afterward, let the Mishnah teach at the time of the festivals of Gentiles, it is prohibited to engage in business with them for 3 days beforehand. So rather conclude from the wording employed that when the Mishnah states the 3 days before the festivals, it is referring to them without their festival. 3 whole days before the festival begins. And the Gemara affirms, conclude from here that this is the case. New subject. A dilemma was raised before the sages. Is the reason for the prohibition against conducting business with idolaters in the days preceding their festivals because the idolater might profit, which will bring him joy, and he will subsequently give thanks to his idol on his festival? Or perhaps it is because this is a violation of the prohibition, and you shall not put a stumbling block before the blind, as one who sells an animal to an idolater thereby aids him in engaging in prohibited idol worship, right? So is it that you're going to stop him from feeling joy so that, he'll be less likely to commit idolatry? Or is it that you shall not put a stumbling block before the blind by enabling him to commit idolatry? Subtle difference. So the Gemara asks, what is the practical difference between these two options? The practical difference is in a situation where the idolater already has an animal of his own. If you say that the reason for the prohibition is because he might profit, here too, the Jew causes him to profit. But if you say that the reason for the prohibition is due to the prohibition, you shall not put a stumbling block before the blind, well then, since the idolater already has his own animal that he's going to sacrifice, selling him an extra one isn't going to change the practice that he's going to engage in. So it wouldn't matter. You could do it. You could sell it to him. On the other hand, if the fact that he's going to buy one more animal that he can make a profit on later and he's happy about that, will give him extra joy in his holiday, then that would still be the case, and that would be the reason not to sell it. So therefore, the practical difference is if he already has an animal, you could sell if the reason was don't place a stumbling block before the blind. Now, but the Gemara challenges this explanation. Well, and even if he already has his own animal, does not one who assists him transgress due to the command, you shall not place a stumbling block before the blind? But isn't it taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Nassan said, and here on page 6b, from where is it derived that a person may not extend a cup of wine to a nazir? Right, a nazir is a Jew who has taken a vow not to, a vow of Naziris, which means that he will not drink wine or eat any product of the grapevine. He will not become impure for the dead, right? He won't enter a cemetery or touch a dead person unless he finds an unattended body, and then he has to perform the mitzvah of burying it. And that he won't become impure for the dead, won't have products of the grapevine. What's the other thing? I'm spacing. There's 3 things that a Nazir vows that he won't do, and he's going to do it for 30 days, right? And then he has to bring the offerings of at the end of his Naziris. Not impure for the dead, no products of the grapevine, and not cut his hair. Thank you. Not cut his hair. Okay, so the point is he can't drink wine. What have you transgressed? Have you committed a sin if you place wine before a Nazir who's trying to uphold his vow of Naziris? From where is it derived that a person may not extend a cup of wine to a Nazir who is prohibited from drinking wine, and that he may not extend a limb severed from a living animal to the descendants of Noah, right? What's one of the 7 Noahide commandments? You can't eat a limb torn from a living animal. So the verse states, and you shall not put a stumbling block before the blind. So even though they are not bound by the same commandments that Jews are bound by, they are bound by the Noahide commandments, and therefore you should not in any way encourage them to violate those commandments. And likewise, a Nazir is bound by prohibitions that other Jews are not bound by, but even so, you should not in any way encourage him to violate his vow. And what is the prohibition, the specific prohibition that prevents us from tempting the Nazir with wine or the Noahide with a limb from a living animal? Don't place a stumbling block before the blind. But here, okay, in this case of the idolater already has an animal, but here in both cases, if one does not give it to him, he can take it himself, right? The Nazir can take the wine, and the Noahide can take the limb. Even if you don't extend it to him, he could do that by himself. But here in both cases, if one does not give it to him, he can take it himself. And yet, the one who provides it to him transgresses due to the prohibition. You shall not place a stumbling block before the blind. So the Gemara answers, here we are dealing with a case where they are standing on 2 sides of a river. And therefore, the recipient could not have taken it himself. In other words, if the Nazir could not get the wine himself, it's in front of him on the table. If you lift it up for him, You're violating, don't place a stumbling block before the blind. But you could argue, yeah, but he could have just picked it up himself. On the other hand, if it's on the other side of the river from him and he can't get it himself and you bring it to him, then you are enabling him to violate his vow in a way that he wouldn't have been able to if you hadn't given it to him. So that's truly putting a stumbling block before the blind. So here we're dealing with a case where they're standing on two sides of a river, and therefore the recipient could not have taken it himself. Since his help was instrumental, the one who conveyed the item has violated the prohibition of putting a stumbling block before the blind. So the Gemara adds, the language of the Baraisa is also precise, as it teaches, a person may not extend, and it does not teach one may not give. So learn from the usage of the term extend that the Baraisa is referring to one located on one side of a river who extends the item to the one on the other side. So presumably, if the idolater already has an animal that he's going to sacrifice on his holiday, and you sell him another one, you haven't enabled him to, sacrifice an animal to his idol. He was already going to do that. So if that was the only reason we don't do it, you could sell the animal. On the other hand, since you're giving him reason to be joyous on his holiday, if the reason is not to give him joy, that will lead him to celebrate more than he would have otherwise, then you're still prohibited from doing it. A dilemma was raised before the sages if one ignored the injunction of the Mishna and engaged in business with idolaters before the festival. You're not supposed to do that. You don't engage in business with an idolater during the 3 days before the festival. But you violated that commandment, that ordinance from the sages in our Mishnah, and you did business with them. Okay, so you sold them not something, let's say that, well, maybe you sold them an animal, or maybe you sold him a sack of flour. You did business with him, and you made money from it. So is that money permitted? Because you violated this ordinance and profited from it, does that money now become off limits to you? A dilemma was raised before the sages. If one ignored the injunction of the Mishnah and engaged in business with idolaters before their festival, what is the status of the profit that he earned? Rabbi Yochanan says if he engaged in business, the profit is prohibited. And Reish Lakish says if he engaged in business, it is permitted to derive benefit from his profits. Rabbi Yochanan raised an objection to Reish Lakish from a Baraisa. With regard to the festivals of idolaters, if one engaged in business, these profits are prohibited. And what? Is it not referring to one who engages in business with idolaters in the days before their festivals? And Reish Lakish responded, no. The Baraisa is referring to business conducted specifically during their festivals. And that's where the law comes out. We actually follow Reish Lakish in this, that if you do business with them during their festival, that's also prohibited, obviously. And if you any profit you make from it, you can't use. You have to get rid of it. But if you do business with them in the days before their festival, since it is not a certainty that business will cause them to rejoice more or do something, therefore you shouldn't have done it, but now that you did it, the profit still remains your profit and you can make use of it. A priori, no, prohibited, right? But after the fact, you could use it. There are those who say that there is a different version of the above exchange. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, which is Reish Lakish, raised an objection to Rabbi Yochanan from a Baraisa. With regard to the festivals of Gentiles, if one engaged in business, these profits are prohibited. Isn't it correct to infer from the Baraisa that if the business occurred during their festivals, yes, deriving benefit from the profits is prohibited. But if it took place before their festivals, no, it is not prohibited. And Rabbi Yochanan responded, no. The Tana calls both this, the days before the festival, and that, the festival itself, their festivals. So the Gemara notes that it is taught in a Baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Reish Lakish. When the sages said that it is prohibited to engage with the Gentiles in business, with the idolaters, they prohibited only in the case of an item that endures. But with regard to an item that does not endure, it is not prohibited. And even with regard to an item that endures, if one did engage in business with the idolaters, deriving benefit from the profits is permitted. And Rav Zevid taught a Baraisa from the school of Rabbi Oshaya. With regard to an item that does not endure, one may sell it to them, but one may not buy it from them because they're getting a profit that will lead to them rejoicing on the holiday. What's something that endures? A sheep. What's something that does not endure? lettuce. The Gemara relates there was an incident involving a certain heretic who sent a Caesarian dinar, Caesarian like Caesar, dinar, so a coin minted with the face of Caesar on it, right? Part of the Roman Empire. It was the promised land at that time. Who sent a Caesarian dinar to Rebbe's grandson, Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah, on the day of the heretics' festival. And Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah said to Reish Lakish, who was sitting before him, "What shall I do? If I take the dinar, he will go and thank his idol for the success of his endeavor. But if I do not take the dinar, he will harbor enmity toward me." Reish Lakish said to him, "Take the dinar and throw it into a pit in the presence of the heretic." Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah said, "All the more so this will cause him to harbor enmity toward me." Reish Lakish explained, "I said," meaning I meant, that you should throw it in an unusual manner so that it looks as though the dinar accidentally fell from your hand into the pit. So he won't have enmity against you because you didn't do it on purpose, but he won't rejoice on his holiday that he did business with you because the upshot of that business is gone. New subject. The Mishna teaches that it is prohibited to lend items to idolaters and to borrow items from them during the 3 days preceding their festivals. And the Gemara asks, granted, it is prohibited to lend items to them, as this causes them to have a profit. But why is it prohibited to borrow items from them during this period? Doesn't this serve to reduce for them the property that they possess during the festival? Abaye said that the sages issued a decree that it is prohibited to borrow the items from them due to the concern that he might come to lend the items to them. If we're already borrowing and lending and borrowing, then when I borrow items from them during those 3 days, I might end up thinking it's also permitted to lend items to them. So we prohibit both lending and borrowing. Rava said all of it, lending and borrowing, is prohibited for the same reason. As in either situation, the idolater might go and give thanks to his idol as he was pleased that the Jew was forced to borrow the items from him. The Mishnah further teaches that it is prohibited to lend money to them or to borrow money from them. And the Gemara asks, granted, it is prohibited to lend money to them as this causes them to have a profit. But if one wants to borrow money from them, why is it prohibited? Abaye said the sages issued a decree that it is prohibited to borrow money from them due to the concern that he might come to lend money to them. Rava said no, all of it, lending and borrowing money, is prohibited for the same reason, as in either situation, the idolater will go and give thanks to his object of idol worship. The Mishnah also teaches that it is prohibited to repay debts owed to them and to collect payment of their debts. And once again, the Gemara asks, granted, it is prohibited to repay debts owed to them, as giving them the money at this time causes them to have a profit and joy. But why is it prohibited to collect payment of their debts? Doesn't this serve to reduce their fortune, reduce the resources they have available to celebrate their festival with their idol, and maybe reduce joy since they've paid off money? But Abaye said the sages issued a decree that it is prohibited to collect debts from them due to the concern that he might come to repay their debts, right? That, again, we don't want to pay off or collect in those 3 days because we might, come to pay off, which gives them joy, if we think it's okay to collect. But Rava said, no, all of it. Repaying and collecting debts is prohibited for the same reason, as in either situation, the idolater must go and give thanks to his idol for having had sufficient funds to pay his debts. It does give joy to somebody to pay off a debt. That's very real, I would say. The Gemara notes, and all of the prohibitions listed in the Mishnah are necessary. As if the Mishnah taught only that it is prohibited to engage with them in business, one could have said that the reason for the prohibition is because it causes the idolater to have profit, and he will go and give thanks to his idol. But with regard to borrowing items from them, which serves to reduce for them the property they possess during the festival, one might have thought it's okay. And if the Mishnah had further taught only that it's prohibited to borrow items from them, one might have thought that this is because the matter is significant to the idolater, as he is pleased that the Jew is forced to borrow items from him, and therefore he might go and give thanks. But you might have thought that to borrow money from them is permitted, as there is only distress for the idolater when he lends money, as he would say, my money will not return to me again, since the borrower may never repay the loan. And if the Mishnah taught, in addition, only that it's prohibited to borrow money from them, one might have thought that this is because the idolater says, I will forcibly collect payment from the Jew against his will by means of the promissory note, And now, in any event, he will go and give thanks that the Jew is forced to borrow money from him. But with regard to collecting payment from them, as this money will never return to him again, as one might say that he has distress about paying back the debt, and he will not go and give thanks. Therefore, since one might have reached these conclusions, it is necessary for the Mishnah to teach all the different cases, because each case teaches a slightly different matter. New subject, the Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Yehuda says one may collect the repayment of debts from them because this causes the idolater distress. And the Gemara asks, and doesn't Rabbi Yehuda accept the principle that even though he is distressed now, he will be happy afterward? But isn't it taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda says a woman may not apply lime to her skin during the intermediate days of the festival? Now we're talking about a Jewish woman applying lime to her skin during Chol HaMoed, the intermediate days of a Jewish festival like Sukkot or Pesach. And so what's going on here? A woman may not apply lime to her skin during the intermediate days of the festival in order to remove bodily hair, right, a depilatory, and soften her skin, because this temporarily disfigures her until the lime is removed. And Rabbi Yehuda concedes with regard to lime that she can peel off during the intermediate days of the festival, that she may apply it on the intermediate days of the festival, as, even though she is distressed now, as the lime renders her unattractive while it's on her, she will then be happy afterward when the lime is removed and she becomes more attractive. So from that teaching, which is totally unrelated, but it's just about the logic of it, it is evident from that Baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda does take into account the joy that will be experienced at a later time with regard to permitting an action now. And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says in response, leave aside the laws of the intermediate days of Jewish festivals. These cannot be compared to other cases, as with regard to all the labors that are permitted on a festival, this is the reason for the leniency. Although he is distressed by performing them now, as they involve effort and trouble, he will be happy afterward on the festival itself that he performed them during the intermediate days, because he enjoys the benefits of the labor. In other words, in the intermediate days, you might actually be doing something that prepares for the festival at the end, right? Both Sukkot and Pesach have full festival days that are like Shabbos, except that cooking is allowed at the beginning of the festival and at the end of the festival. In the intermediate days, we do have some restrictions on the work that we do compared to just the regular working days of the rest of the year, but a lot of types of work that are not permitted on the festivals are allowed during the intermediate days. Why? So that we can have joy at the festival that's coming at the end of the days of the festival, right? 7th and 8th day Passover, 7th and 8th day Sukkot. Ravina said that there is a different answer. Rabbi Yehuda maintains with regard to repaying a debt that an idolater is always distressed, even after the fact. But in general, Rabbi Yehuda does take into account the joy that will be experienced at a later time. The Gemara notes, the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha, as it states that one may not collect payment from an idolater during the 3 days preceding their festivals without differentiating between various cases. And this is different than what Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha says in a Baraisa. In the case of a loan with a promissory note, one may not collect payment from idolaters before their festivals, as one can demand repayment of the debt by presenting the promissory note in his possession at some other time. By contrast, in the case of a loan by oral agreement, one may collect payment from them, because he is considered as one who salvages money from them, since he has no promissory note and cannot be sure that the idolater will repay the note at another time. Therefore, if he can get paid at any time, including during those 3 days, Yehoshua ben Korcha would allow it. And the Gemara relates, Rav Yosef sat behind Rabbi Abba in the study hall. And Rabbi Abba sat before Rav Huna as a student before his teacher. And Rav Huna sat and said the following statements. The law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha, and the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara explains, as for the statement that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha, this is referring to that which we said with regard to collecting on a loan by oral agreement from the idolaters during the days preceding their festivals. As for the statement that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, this is as it is taught in a Mishna, tractate Bava Kama, page 100b, in the case of one who gives wool to a dyer to dye it red for him, and instead the dyer dyed it black. Or one who gives wool to a dyer to have it dyed black, and the dyer dyed it red. In that case, and now we're on page 7a, Rabbi Meir says the dyer messed up. You wanted the wool dyed red, and he dyed it black. So do you have to pay? Can you walk away? Does the dyer owe you the value of the wool that he now rendered unusable for you since you wanted a different color? Remember, we saw this. What was the result? Rabbi Meir says that the dyer gives the owner of the wool the value of his wool. Since the dyer deviated from the owner's wishes, he is considered akin to a robber who acquires the stolen items by changing them. Therefore, like a robber, he keeps the changed item and he pays the owner its original value. Rabbi Yehuda says the dyer does not acquire the wool. Rather, the owner of the wool must reimburse the dyer for his expenses without losing out himself. If the value of the enhancement, i.e. the enhanced value of the wool, exceeds the expenses of the dyer, the owner of the wool gives the dyer the expenses. And if the expenses exceed the enhancement, he gives him the value of the enhancement. The fact is that even though you wanted the wool to be dyed black and now it's dyed red, this wool that is dyed red is more valuable than wool that is not dyed at all. And you have this more valuable wool now in your possession. It's inconvenient that you didn't get what you wanted, but you did get something enhanced, and that's how Rabbi Yehuda deals with it. Rav Yosef turned his face away to demonstrate his displeasure with Rav Huna's comment. And the Gemara explains why Rav Yosef was unhappy. Granted, his ruling that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha was necessary, as it might enter your mind to say that because this is a dispute between an individual and the many, the law should be in accordance with the opinion of the many, not in accordance with Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha. Rav Huna therefore teaches us that in this case, the law is in accordance with Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha, despite the fact that he is an individual, maybe because he came later and added a wrinkle that people hadn't thought of that was valuable. But why do I need the statement that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda? It is obvious that this is the case, as there's a well-known principle that whenever there is a dispute in a Mishnah and afterward one opinion is presented as the ruling of an unattributed Mishnah, i.e. without attribution to a particular sage, or that the ruling is subject to debate, the law is in accordance with the opinion presented in the unattributed Mishnah. And the Gemara adds that here the ruling of the unattributed Mishnah appears after the dispute, as the dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir appears in tractate Bava Kama, and the unattributed Mishnah appears in tractate Bava Metzia, which is the next tractate in the order of the Mishnah. And as we learned in the Mishnah in Bava Metzia, whoever changes the terms accepted by both parties is at a disadvantage. If we had a contract, we agreed on something, and then you changed one of the terms, you're at a disadvantage. I can choose, to either take liquidated damages or, keep the item in question, but I can choose since you violated the contract. Whoever changes the terms accepted by both parties is the one at the disadvantage when we come around to, establishing what is the outcome. And whoever reneges on an agreement is at a disadvantage. This statement is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that a craftsman who deviates from his assignment is at a disadvantage, as he receives only the expense or the enhancement, whichever is worth less. And the Gemara asks, and why did Rav Huna feel it necessary to state explicitly that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda? It was necessary because Rav Huna holds that the Mishnah is not sequential, and therefore it is not clear that the Mishnah in Bava Kama precedes the Mishnah in Bava Metzia. Consequently, it can be said that, in fact, this is a case of an unattributed Mishnah that is taught first and only afterward appears in the dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. And the Gemara challenges this. If that is so, that the Mishnah is not sequential, then in every case of a dispute that is afterward followed by an unattributed Mishnah, let us say that the Mishnah is not sequential. Right? What they're saying is, we are studying the Talmud, Bavli, right, which is a combination of the Mishnah and the Gemara. So the Gemara is the commentary on the Mishnah. When you're studying just the Mishnah, then every time we come to a Mishnah, right, it's like you read the Mishnah and then you go on to the next Mishnah. You wouldn't read all the pages and pages of Gemara in between. So what they're saying is, if you have a Mishnah where there's a debate between two sages, and then the next Mishnah, or one later in line in the chain of Mishnahs, sort of answers that question with an unattributed Mishnah, it means that that's where the law ended up. And we don't need to know who said it because it's unattributed. That means it's authoritative. But now they're saying, well, if you're saying that the fact that it comes later doesn't necessarily means it is later, just later in the sequence of where it appears in the redacted Mishnahs, but not necessarily later in time, then how could we ever say that when an unattributed Mishnah appears after, so to speak, a Mishnah that includes a debate between two sages, that the law will follow the unattributed Mishnah? Because what does it mean later if you're not going to agree that later down in the Mishnah means later in time, and therefore that's where the law ended up? That's the challenge. And so then the answer, and I'm almost done, so questions or comments, please get them in now. So the Gemara explains, and Rav Huna, how would he respond to this claim? He would say, when do we say that the Mishnah is non-sequential? The Mishnah is considered sequential when both Mishnayos appear in the same tractate. But when they are in two different tractates, we do say that the Mishnah is not sequential, and it is unclear which one was taught last. It's only when they're in the same tractate that we can say the later unattributed Mishnah came later in time, and that's where the law ended up. But if it addresses the same question but appears in a different tractate, we can't make the same claim. Therefore, in this case, as each Mishnah is found in a different tractate, one in Bava Kama and the other one in Bava Metzia, one cannot say for certain which was taught first. And how would Rav Yosef respond? Because Bava Metzia and Bava Kama and Bava Basra are a special case. We call them separate tractates in our editions of the Gemara, but he would say, Rav Yosef would say, all of tractate Nezikin, which is to say, Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, and Bava Basra, is considered one tractate, and therefore its internal order of Mishnayos is sequential. And if you wish, say instead that Rav Yosef maintained that it was not necessary to say that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda because his ruling is taught amid other decided halachas, other decided laws, meaning whoever changes the terms accepted by both parties is at a disadvantage, and whoever reneges on an agreement is at a disadvantage, i.e. this statement is unrelated to the subject matter of the chapter in which it appears. Consequently, it is evidently the accepted law, and therefore Rav Huna's statement was unnecessary. That's where we'll stop, take a couple of comments, and continue, God willing, tomorrow, Sunday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. So Bill says, so having studied the Romans fairly extensively, I was briefly a bit baffled by the sage's description of the Roman midwinter festivals, since it sounds very different from how the Romans themselves do. However, I think what's happening is that the sages from outside looking in are writing a descriptive definition. For example, the Romans had no festival called Calenda as such, but the 1st of January was the Calends of January, the Calends being a monthly festival for the first day of the month, and the Ides, the monthly festival for the mid-month, right? The Ides of March, when Julius Caesar was killed, is the 15th of March. Mid-month is called the Ides. I bet it's pronounced Ides, right? I don't know. And the January Calends was extremely important because it was the date that the consuls entered office and sacrifices were made divine to divine the fortune of the Republic and later the empire for the year to come. And the days leading up to the Calends were stuffed full of so many other festivals that, from the sage's perspective, it must have looked like one long riotous feast. Right, and that's maybe just how they marked like that's their calendar period, but the point is they had a lot of end-of-year festivals, and we don't do business with them lest it lead to them having more sacrifices or more joy in their idolatrous sacrifices during that period. That's what I've got for us tonight, and with God's help, we're going to get on tomorrow, Sunday, regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night.